Joseph Mengele was the infamous Nazi doctor at the Auschwitz concentration camp during World War II. People have been searching for him ever since. Hello, I'm Esther Fink, and with me is Gerald Astor, the author of a new fascinating book entitled The Last Nazi, The Life and Times of Dr. Joseph Mengele. So stay with us for this edition of Witness. Welcome, Mr. Astor, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
The title of your book is The Last Nazi, The Life and Times of Dr. Joseph Mengele. You have the word last in quotations. Why is that?
Well, I believe he's the last Nazi only in the sense that he's the last person from that period who's going to ever arouse the emotion, the headlines, and the interest. He so wholly encapsulated the history of the Holocaust. But there are no other war criminals around who are going to cause that much horror when their deeds are revealed. The other day they discovered Alois Brunner in Syria. Brunner was the second in command to Adolf Eichmann in arranging deportations. The story was in the news for perhaps one day and then just about disappeared, which is again a sign that Mengele was the last person who was going to capture the media's attention. But I don't believe by any stretch of the imagination that he's the last representative of the Nazi ideology who will surface in the world.
Is this a serious problem when the world no longer looks for Nazis?
I think there's yes, I do. I think there are many signs around the world of the kinds of circumstances and behavior that could lead to a duplication in one form or another of the Holocaust. We could look at South Africa, where they have shunted an entire group of people off to a separate area to live. They've denied them their civil liberties, their civil rights. And the people in control, the whites, pretend that this is not happening, don't want to know about it. And we've seen that murder on a massive scale has taken place in Cambodia or Kampuchea, and the behavior in other places, the Soviet Union, even Northern Ireland, where groups of people are condemned by their opponents simply because of who they are, not because of anything they've done.
Let's take a look at Mengele's background. I have a hard time as a child of survivors to understand what kind of a person can grow up and do the crimes that he did. What can you tell us about his background?
Well, he was the firstborn son of the wealthiest family in the city of Günzburg. His father had a very prosperous manufacturing company that made agriculture farm machinery. He was a somewhat spoiled child, indulged, except that his mother was also a very severe disciplinarian, according to him. It's quite possible that she did not spare the rod, and there's suggestions even that he was abused, which would, we'd certainly know that abused children grow up to be adults who abuse children, which is part of his history. He also was a young man growing up in Germany that was captivated by Adolf Hitler, the frustration over the Versailles Treaty, the condition of the economy led the people to look for scapegoats, and Germany has a long tradition of anti-Semitism. which grew more and more virulent, and Mengele, as a young man, was very badly infected with that disease. It's something that he was afflicted with all his life. He never stopped thinking that the Jews were the enemy of the Germans and somebody who should be destroyed.
Did Mengele grow up with Jews? Did he go to school with Jews?
No, the town of Günzburg was, like many places, almost free of Jews, at least in his neighborhood. There was an area where it was called Jewtown, and that's where the Jews who were from that section lived. Of course, during the war, they were all hauled away, and none of them ever returned.
So then you think his anti-Semitism was really a learned trait and not because he grew up with Jews, is that correct?
I don't believe it had anything to do with his experience with Jews. In fact, I think we all should recognize that anti-Semitism rarely is due to the experience with a Jew. After all, the Jews of Germany were only 1% of the population, and all of those Germans who harbored anti-Semitic feelings could not have had some sort of unpleasant experience with somebody who was Jewish.
In the book, there's a picture of Mengele at school, and the faces of the other boys in his class, or the kids he went to school with, seemed to be blackened out. Did you blacken out those pictures?
No, that was done by the source who supplied the photograph. Perhaps it was an attempt to protect people against invasion of privacy. I don't know the laws in Germany about this. They may be stricter than they are in the United States. And also it may have been that someone felt that these people should not be stigmatized for having known Mengele when he was a child. There's a strong feeling in the town of Günzburg that, after all, its most notorious son only lived there for 20 years, and he did not commit his crimes there. So the town feels that they should not be blamed for his behavior.
And yet they've named a street in the town after him, right?
The street is named for the family, which is the largest industry in the town. His father was considered a benefactor in the town, and the Mengeles, even though he wholly supported the Nazi Party, and of course the father and the family supported Joseph when he was a fugitive, but the Mengeles have used money to buy goodwill. They donate a fire engine. They have created a nursery, and they're the largest single employers. Some 2,000 people who live in that city owe their existence to the financial existence to the Mengeles. So nobody speaks out against them.
Then Mengele went on to medical school, correct? And I think he also has a degree, a PhD in philosophy.
He started out as a student at the University of Munich, where he did earn a PhD in philosophy. Of course, Munich, the university there, was a hotbed of pro-Nazi sentiment in the early 30s. Mengele, like the others, heard Hitler speak in Munich, and he was won over entirely. From the University of Munich, he went on to the University of Frankfurt, where he secured his medical degree.
And then this was right before the war.
That's
correct?
right. And he never practiced medicine in terms of handling patients. He went almost instantly into research under his mentor, Professor Ottmar von Verschuer, and the subject of investigation was what they called race biology. Von Verschuer was an open advocate of racial purity and boasted how Hitler had at last brought science and medicine into society and out of the classroom and academia.
How did he get to Auschwitz? Did he volunteer that particular job?
All of the doctors who were at Auschwitz were volunteers. Mengele first served in the Waffen-SS, which was the combat troops under the SS, and he did serve on the Western Front and then on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union, where he was badly wounded. On his recovery, he was apparently declared unfit to serve in the in combat areas, and he volunteered to go to Auschwitz, which was for him seemed like a perfect opportunity to do the kind of research which would satisfy his ambition to become a professor of medicine. He was sponsored at Auschwitz by von Verschuur, who was now the director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin.
By the time of the war, Mengele was already married. Was his wife, Irene is her name, was she at Auschwitz with him?
Apparently she visited him once at Auschwitz, as did his father, but it was not a place that, except for the camp commandant, Rudolf Hoss, the families were not on the scene. It was not a place that one wanted outside witnesses. Also, it was not a very pleasant place to be. There was great danger of disease, pollution, etc.
In your book, you have a quote from an associate of Mengele's at Auschwitz that says that he was a pleasant fellow. He was a man with a very wide horizon, a very interesting person. Do you think that most of the other high-ranking Nazis would also be described at that time as pleasant fellows?
No, and the source of that quote was a doctor named Hans Munk, who refused to do what Mengele did. He did not select people for gassing. He did not experiment on people. He never killed anyone. In fact, Munk was acquitted of war crimes by the Polish government after the war. But what Munk was saying was that Mengele was a much more intelligent, as far as he could see, to the average SS doctor. As I said before, they were all volunteers. Many of them were seeking to avoid combat service. Also, it was an opportunity for them to do the kind of research that they wanted to do. But I don't think there were many of the higher-ranking Nazis who were intelligent, as well-educated as Mengele. In fact, very few of them were.
Is this another reason why we have such an interest in searching for Mengele over the years?
I think there's an assumption among us, which is natural, that an educated man, a man who genuinely admired classical music, the poetry of Dante, a man who was a physician, held a doctorate in philosophy, could not commit cruel acts. I think this is our mistake to believe that somehow education, background necessarily immunizes one so that the beast does not come out.
How did Mengele start working with the famous experiments? I don't think that's something that he started working on his own.
No, to the contrary. The SS, even before Mengele ever got to Auschwitz, had already engaged in horrible medical experiments at places like Dachau and Buchenwald, and set up installations at these camps, making it possible to do this kind of research. In the beginning, the notion was that they would do studies which could be useful for the troops, the effects of high altitude or immersion in cold water for a long period of time, ways to combat infectious diseases, which were a threat to the Army. They went on from there even to investigating cases where soldiers were deliberately injuring themselves in a way that would remove them from the dangers of battle. And they wanted to do experiments to see how they could prevent this and detect it. But the whole notion of research gradually expanded, and Mengele, as I say, was sponsored by the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. He sent specimens there, and they requested specimens which included blood, organs, eyeballs, and where they did further research on it, and then they would request more of this item or that item.
At the end of the war, as the Russians were coming in from the east, Auschwitz was liberated, but it seems that Mengele had disappeared from the camp sometime before the end of the war, and we don't see or hear from him until 4 or 5 years later. Why was he not put on one of the criminals list or most wanted criminals list? Where did he
Well, he
go
was
to?
on the circulars of war criminals. I've seen these circulars, which were issued by all of the Allied governments, half a dozen of them. Each one of them had citizens upon whom Mengele had wreaked his terrible experiments and whom he had selected for gassing and murder. The problem was that after the Germans surrendered, Mengele was probably captured by the American armies. In fact, he has said this. But I believe he gave a false name, so he was not identified as the Joseph Mengele on the war crimes circulars. He had avoided having his blood type tattooed on his arm, which was the mark of a member of the SS. And SS people who were captured were singled out for special investigations. So that after a few days of captivity, he was undoubtedly released. He was clever enough to realize, however, that he could not surface as Joseph Mengele. So he remained under another name, hiding out in Bavaria near his hometown of Günzburg, where he could visit his family, where the family could support him with money. We also have to remember that the zeal for war crimes trials quickly cooled after the first few Nuremberg trials, at which they convicted some of the top political leaders and generals. There was a trial of doctors. Some of them were convicted and executed. And there was a trial of some members of industry. But after that, the Allies were no longer interested really in pursuing war criminals. They felt they had a much more important job ahead, that of resisting what they perceived as the spread of communism from the East. Quickly, they turned over the responsibility for war criminals to the new West German government, which had very little interest in pursuing it, because after all, these were their friends, their relatives, their fathers' sons who participated.
And the next time we hear of Mengele, it seems to be September of 1949, when he left for Argentina.
Right. There was some apparent talk of apprehending him, of denouncing him. The Mengele family, through its contacts, learned of this. And so he slipped across the border to Italy, where sanctuary was given to all of the German refugees and refugees from Eastern Europe, without any question of whether they were war criminals or simply fleeing from communism. Of course, the Mengele family had a good deal of money. They had contacts in Rome as well. He quickly obtained a Red Cross passport under the name of Helmut Gregori, and he sailed from Genoa to a perfect haven for Nazis, Argentina, under Juan Perón.
And he wasn't the only one of the Nazis to leave at that time.
One of tens of thousands who left at that time.
It seems that the Nazis had an easier time leaving Europe than the displaced persons, than the victims of the Nazis, correct?
Probably it was easier for those people who left after the war than it was for the Jews to leave before the war. Many countries in South America have traditions of anti-Semitism also, and they were not particularly hospitable to taking large numbers of Jews who were trying to flee persecution. And on the other hand, South America has long had a resident German population. Germans had been going there for many years, and particularly in the 10 years before World War II, the Nazis had sent people there to set up organizations which would help them when they attempted to capture the Western Hemisphere.
It seems that once Mengele got to South America, he lived in a variety of countries, and I understand at times he even used his own name very openly. Is that true?
He obtained Argentine citizenship in 1956 under his own name, got a passport under his own name, which incidentally involved the West German embassy there, wiring Günzburg to get confirmation of his birth, so that both the Germans in Buenos Aires and the people in Günzburg certainly knew where Mengele was. When pursuit seemed to be coming after him in Argentina, he went across the border to another friendly country, Paraguay, where he also got citizenship under his own name. The reason he still remained under his own name was that he felt secure in that Paraguayan law forbade the extradition of any Paraguayan citizen for whatever crime he may have committed outside the country. It was only after the Israelis kidnapped Adolf Eichmann and Israeli agents showed up in Paraguay, that Mengele realized he was going to have to go underground, and that's when he began his long period of invisibility, 18 years.
And that was all in Brazil?
The 18 years of hiding out was basically all in Brazil. I believe he made a few short trips to Bolivia, Paraguay, perhaps to Peru, but for the most part, he was in Brazil.
Mengele must have been getting quite a bit of help from family members and friends. Who were some of these friends that helped him in South America?
Well, there was a Colonel Hans Ulrich Rudel, who was a highly decorated hero of the Luftwaffe in World War II, who had and was an extreme right-winger involved in neo-Nazi parties right after the war, who had become also a traveling businessman in South America. Rudel profited by doing business with the Mengele company, charging them exorbitant sums for the materials he sold them. This was the reward for him aiding Mengele in obtaining citizenship in Paraguay, and then in placing Mengele with a family of Hungarian expatriates living in Brazil, who were checked out to make certain that these people were not hostile to Nazi ideology. Although at the time they took Mengele in, they did not know that he was the infamous Angel of Death. But when they learned it 2 years later, they didn't make a serious effort to throw him out.
Most of these people that helped him, Sedlmayr and the Stammers and the Bosserts, are still alive and living in Brazil, correct?
All of those people are alive, with the exception of Rudel, who died in 1982, and the sort of fixer for the operations, an Austrian named Wolfgang Gerhard, who died in 1978, and actually Mengele was buried under the name of Wolfgang Gerhard.
Are these people going to be prosecuted for hiding
There
Mengele?
seems to be no sign that the Brazilians are going to move against the Bosserts or the Stammers who live in Brazil, or that the West Germans will move against Hans Sedlmayr, who was an employee of the Mengele company, because curiously, or not so curiously, the body was discovered after 6 years of being entombed. The statute of limitations in Germany for aiding a fugitive from justice is 5 years. So it would seem that there is no way that they can prosecute Sedlmayr. And certainly there's been no effort to do anything to the family, because German law says that the family of a fugitive is immune from any kind of prosecution.
So many people have been involved over the years in following Mengele, trying to find him and such. I understand from your book that his son Rolf came to visit him. I don't understand how no one simply followed his son and was able to capture Mengele.
Well, the people who I will describe as amateur sleuths, Seaman Wiesenthal, the Klarsfelds, and I say amateur simply because they don't have the resources to be professional investigators, really were not in a position to place a full-time surveillance on someone like Rolf Mengele or Hans Sedlmayr, of whom it was known that he had contact with Mengele. So that there was no way they were going to track him down. The fact is, the West German government's excuse has been that since Rolf was a family member, they had no right to follow him. I feel that if there had been suspicions that this was a terrorist organization, the Baader Meinhof gang or the Red Brigades, they would have found a way to have kept a close watch on his movements and on Sedlmayr.
It seems that the whole Mengele story, the finding of his remains and such, broke just at the time of the 40th anniversary of the liberation of the concentration camps.
Well, I think that the publicity of the 40th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the mock trial that was held at Yad Vashem, the reward money that was raised as a result of the publicity, I think this conspired to help find Mengele. I'm not quite satisfied that it was by chance that he was discovered at this point. There was tremendous heat on the family. They began giving off hints that he was dead, which people refused publicly to accept. So that I think that the disclosures may have had something to do with, the amount of publicity and the feeling, well, we've got to get this out of the way now, or it's going to just chase us forever.
And why would the family keep it a secret for 6 years?
They were protecting people like Rudel, who died in 1982 and who could have been subject to prosecution. They were protecting Sadelmeyer, who's still alive, and there may be other people. They may have felt that the Bosserts and the Stammers deserved such protection if they could give it to them. After all, they had served as their accomplices in taking care of Mengele, so there was a good reason for them to protect people. And also, the Mengele family has an attitude that of the world can be damned. They really don't care about public opinion, and they were not going to denounce their black sheep. We would call him a black sheep. I don't know how they felt about it. He was an annoyance to them, probably, because the publicity was not pleasant for them to deal with, and they just wanted to do their business.
Do you believe that the remains that were found in Brazil actually are those of Mengele?
I'm almost totally convinced, short of fingerprints, which were unobtainable from the what was left of him. But the forensic scientists' evidence is quite convincing, and they do show the peculiar gap he had between his two upper front teeth, which you can see in photographs of him as a young man, and the computerized superimposition of the skull upon photographs of Mengele match in 24 separate points of comparison. The odds of some other skull being fitting that neatly are astronomical. And just the circumstances, the Bosserts, the Stammers, the son, Wolfgang Gerhardt, these people are not capable of mounting the kind of hoax that would be required. You have to look at some of these people, like Wolfgang Gerhardt was an alcoholic, ne'er-do-well. The Stammers required the Mengele family to support them, the Bosserts as well. They're not that shrewd or that intelligent, really, to have carried off something like that.
I suppose we should be glad that the search for Mengele is really over, and yet we seem to be somewhat frustrated that there was no trial and there was no prosecution of a criminal such as Mengele.
Well, there's very little satisfaction one can get from the fact that he's dead. Other than the fact that this terrible man is finally off the earth. But he managed to live out his days without being really prosecuted, without all of his terrible deeds being published while he was alive, without him being forced to talk about what went on in the camps and the extent of the involvement of the rest of medicine, which he certainly could have talked about. And the survivors have to feel cheated that they did not get a chance to have their day in court.
Thank you so much for joining us. I have so many more questions to ask, but we're out of time, and I guess we'll have to wait for your next book. Thank you also for joining us today on Witness.